Hello, everybody. Ooh, down more. I talk loud. That's the problem. So, yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Till it's too loud. Woo. Okay. I'll try to keep it down. I'm so glad you came to see. Well, it is good to be here, and thank you. I guess cold is all relative, right? You probably have a lot of northern friends who are just dying to come to Florida right now, even though we're in their 50s. They're in the single digits up there. So we have certainly thinned out our blood, I suspect, down here in Florida enough to feel like this is cold. But I'm glad that you're here. And I'm looking forward to this time together. Life is all about adventure, right? So I've never really done anything like this before. So that's probably not a good way to start out a class, because now you're saying, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be awful." But I'm looking forward to just doing some exploration. How many of you like movies? Raise your hands. Ah, that's why you're here. Ah, okay. I like movies, and Amanda and I enjoy going out to see movies, and fortunately we have a similar taste, so it isn't hard for us to decide which movies to go to and which movies not to go to. And I suspect there's all sorts of tastes that are represented here in this room tonight when it comes to going to movies. And it's very difficult when you think about, every class I teach, it was a good idea 6 months before the class. And then you get to you're like, what did I think about? What was I thinking doing this thing? Because you have all these sort of broad ideas of the ways you'd like to approach a class like this. And then all of a sudden it comes down to, okay, now which movies are we going to take a look at? Because there's just a ton of movies that you could put into the category of God and Hollywood. I suspect you'd all have a list that we could potentially consider. And it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the only time we would offer a class like this. One of the ideas or dreams I would have is maybe even creating a little group that would, kind of do movies together and, pick and choose movies that we think might be appropriate to kind of think through and draw out of their stories, the deeper spiritual meanings that we could have conversation about. So that will be something we talk about in perhaps the weeks to come, and to kind of see where this idea of art and the world of the spirit come together. And I really do feel like art, whatever form of art you might consider or think of, is really a portal into the world of the spirit. Because art in many ways evokes something out of us and also inspires us to do something. And I think film has a way of doing that. And I don't in any way position myself as an expert on film. Actually, Sarah Sobolewski over here is a film producer, so she should actually be teaching the class. I should be taking pictures, and you should be teaching the class. So I'm not here to talk to you about the intricacies of filmmaking, and I'm not here to be a historian about how the movie has come together and such. There may be some anecdotal or trivial types of interesting pieces of information that we'll be able to share with you about some of these movies we're watching. But somebody asked me about, how is it that you came up with this idea? I said, well, I just like talking about my favorite movies. And I'll have to confess to you that some of the movies I've chosen are some of my favorites. And some of the movies I've chosen are ones that I suspect, I know have deeper meanings, but they're not necessarily my favorite movies. We have selected 6 movies to take a look at. Are you all familiar with the list of movies that we're going to be watching? No? Okay. It's been advertised in in the bulletin. But we're going to be taking a look at 6 movies Tonight we're going to be looking at the Field of Dreams. And then next week we're going to be looking at A River Runs Through It. And then the following week a movie called Grand Canyon. And how many of you have heard of Grand Canyon? Not many of you. It's a movie that came out in the 90s that escaped a lot of people's notice. But it was one I really, really enjoyed and has a lot of profound, I think, profound and spiritual meaning to it. And then following that, we're going to look at Waking Ned Divine. How many of you have seen Waking Ned Divine? That's an acquired taste, Waking Ned Divine. But nevertheless, I think it has something profound to say, especially when it's put up against the following movie called Babette's Feast. How many of you have seen Babette's Feast? Which great foreign film. If you don't mind watching foreign film and captions, it really, I think, is a profound. And it's interesting to look at in juxtaposition to the movie Waking Ned Divine. And then we'll finish up with a movie called Places in the Heart. How many of you have seen Places in the Heart? So these are great 1980, 1990 sort of classics that most of which we're looking at. And not to say, again, that we couldn't go into the future and look at more recent movies that might even be easier for you to get a hold of. Before I forget, again, the good ideas that I had months ago sometimes don't make any practical sense. What I realized was, my assumption was that these would be movies that would be easy for you to access, either on Netflix or on DVD or whatever, because really we can't take the time to watch the movie together. At least I can't take the time to watch the movie together with you. And it's probably more convenient for you to watch on your own these movies. And I hope that many of you had the chance, or at least years ago, had the chance to see Field of Dreams. How many of you have seen Field of Dreams? Oh, good. Good. How many? 4 times. Oh, well, there you go. Come on up here, Don. You want to teach? I've probably seen it 10 times, maybe. It's one of my favorites. But there are 2 movies that are harder to get a hold of, and that being Grand Canyon and Babette's Feast. I realized I couldn't find them on Netflix. I couldn't find them even on yes.
You can get it on Netflix.
You can. Oh, you got. Okay, well, yeah, got it. Yeah.
But if you search for it, you'll get it.
Okay, good. So Babette's Feast is easier to get a hold of than Grand Canyon. I couldn't find Grand Canyon anywhere. Amazon Prime again. Oh, you got the last one, huh, Faye? Oh, nice. Real nice. Yeah, okay. Well, I hope you learned something from this class, I'll tell you. Anyway. Yeah, some are on YouTube. Grand Canyon is on YouTube, but it's a very difficult thing, to watch on YouTube. The full screen is not available. You kind of lose some of the picture. Yeah.
Video Renaissance on B Ridge Road. That's all.
Oh, Video Renaissance.
Yeah.
Where is it? Okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay, they have those available. Did you get the last one too? No.
I did check one out from them. I checked Grand Canyon out from them, and I had checked the list, and they had them all.
Okay, that's great. And we do have copies available in the church office that we are putting on loan for 2 days. And the library, thank the good Lord, the library decided they wanted to be partner with us on this, our church library. And so they went ahead and bought copies of the movies in order to loan them out for you. So you can find those in the front office on Sunday mornings. Is that right, Carolyn? Carolyn, you still?
Yep. Any day the church office is open.
Yeah.
We have 2 copies of each movie, though, so
Right.
they go back.
Yeah. And, be good Presbyterians and bring them back on time, right? But all that being said, we have set aside 2 days if you want to watch and you don't feel like you can get a hold of it or they're not available, both Grand Canyon and Babette's Feast. And I wrote those dates down. I use these glasses only for effect. And I'll remind you of these dates as we move on. But Grand Canyon We're going to have an airing over in the Music and Arts Building on January the 16th at 6:30. That's a Tuesday night. And then we're going to have an airing of Babette's Feast on January the 29th. That's a Monday night at 6:30 here in the chapel. Okay, so if you're worried about getting a hold of those two movies, or if you have that time available, we will be glad to show those to you on those two respective times. And I'll remind you of those dates as we get closer to them. I think I've taken care of all the business. So, any other questions before we move on to anything I've just said? Okay. Why do we go or watch movies?
Entertainment, as you say, to get us out of this world.
Get us a little out of this world, so it maybe escape. Entertainment. Why else do we watch movies? Enjoyment. Learn something. Favorite actor? Yeah? Okay. You want to go further on that, Joan? No. Favorite actor?
I think at its very best we go to connect with something that is true and makes us feel like we're not as alone because we see something that resonates with us, like being really true about the human experience.
Right. So we go looking for a deeper truth or meaning that we can connect with, that perhaps helps us to feel like we're not as alone as we may feel we are in this world, or we're not alone, at least with our thoughts. Why else do we go to movies? Yes? Socialization. Go to the movies, just to get into a movie theater with people, which is happening less and less, right? Since we can be isolated in our homes and watch just by ourselves, right? So, but yeah, it's a great. I like going out to the movies myself. Just kind of nice to be in a crowd of people, except for the last movie I was at with the guy with the big hat and he sat right in front of me. But that's the way it goes. Any other? Yes.
Vicarious experience.
I'm sorry.
Vicarious experience.
Vicarious experience, right? So you're kind of you're living into somebody else's life, right? You're kind of experiencing it through their own lives or through the character of the story, right? Good answer. Yeah.
Go watch people get blown up.
Go watch people get blown up. That's kind of nice. Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, and say to yourself, "I'm glad it's him and not me," right? Well, yeah, and the truth of the matter is, we go to movies a lot of times because of what particular kind of movie it might be. There's some people that like to go to action movies, and get all riled up with the action. Some like to go to suspense and frightful movies. They want to jump out of their seats and have popcorn fly over the place. And there are others that like to go to musicals and watch those. Because it's a little bit of an escape or entertainment or comedy. To be able to laugh at life in general, or to laugh at particular experiences. And then there's simply going to a movie in order to experience story. And I think that the direction we're going to be taking, as you can see in this list, there's not a lot of comedy. Well, Waking Dead Divine's a comedy. But there's not a lot of comedy. There isn't a whole lot of action. There's not a lot of Friday the 13th Part 6. We're really kind of focused in on story. A lot of times we go to movies because as human beings, I think in part, we are story-driven people. We yearn to understand ourselves relative to narrative, relative to the great story of life, relative to our own stories. We want to locate ourselves in story. We want to understand who we are in the grand scheme of life, and we also want to understand where we are in the grand scheme, perhaps, of our own lives. And story helps us to be in touch with that, to wonder about that. And frankly, as followers of Jesus, we are ones who participate in a story, right? The story of Christ. We just, we relive the story of Christ every year, right? We go from Christmas to Easter, and we are living out the story of Jesus. And we are trying to put ourselves within that story so that we can understand ourselves better by locating ourselves within some greater story. And I think a lot of times we go to movies to put ourselves in touch with a story which helps to inform our own story. Like, who am I? Where am I? And how do I see myself within the narrative arc of a story that I'm going to see as in a movie? So, and stories are a way. This thing is. Is that too grating on you? You're right. Okay. Bothers me more than it bothers you, probably. I hate truth tellers. Anyway, and stories, I think back to what Sarah was saying, stories are our effort toward trying to grasp truth. What is ultimately true about who we are and where we are. Because as human beings, the order of civilization where we find ourselves, we are the truth seekers, right? Apart from any other a level of creation, human beings, conscious as we are yearning to understand what is ultimately true about our lives, about our existence, about the world. And stories are a way by which human beings try to grasp or convey what is believed to be the truth. The story of Jesus is a story about truth. It's a truth claim that Jesus says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And we know the truth in our faith by knowing the story of Jesus. And we grasp the truth as much as we can grasp the story of Jesus. And the themes, the commandments, the teaching, the life, the miracles, all those pieces of the story of Jesus are the means by which we can grasp or try to understand what is the truth of our lives, what is the truth of existence. And so, and we have been storytellers since the beginning of the dawn of human civilization, and human civilization has been basically a process of storytelling, right? The great myths of ancient civilizations are means by which to try to tell the story about what is the nature of existence. The Greeks thought up of gods, Zeus and Hermes and Apollo and all those who were efforts to try to understand the randomness of life. And they created gods to tell stories about in order to help us to understand why is it that we live the way we live. And so when we pick up a book and read a great story, and of course everybody's got their own idea as to what a great story is, but if you just listen to my definition, then you'll be all right. No, but when we open up a book and read a story, a good story is one that will speak to something that is in us, and at the same time will evoke something from us. A good story speaks to something in us, and a good story evokes something from us. The story of Jesus speaks to something in us, about who we are and about our own humanity and our own inhumanity and our sin and our yearning to love and to be loved. And at the same time evokes something from us. It elicits a response. Go and make disciples. Love God. Love neighbor. It commands us out to do something. So hopefully, as we're taking a look at some of the stories that were found within these movies, we will find ways by which they do those two things. What is it speaking to us? What is it speaking to us? And what is it calling out of us as we go about our own life? I don't think the discussion is worth having, frankly. When we talk about movies and stories, I don't think the discussion is worth having if that doesn't ultimately call something out of us. Call us to do something, evoke us to respond in some particular way. I think that's the mark of a good movie, a good story, when it does that kind of thing to us. And the list is long, of course, of all the ways, of all the kinds of stories and movies that we could have taken a look at that would perhaps, fit into these categories of speaking to us and evoking something from us. And a good story will probably address several things that are going on in our lives, several subplots, because every human story has its own subplots, right? I could sit down with any one of you, and it wouldn't take more than probably a half hour to find about 10 subplots that are going on in your life, right? Whether it's related to your family, or whether it's related to your health, or whether it's related to, your career, or whether it's related to, your childhood, whatever the case may be. But there are all these subplots that are going on in our lives, and a good story will address several of those subplots at the same time in order to kind of validate the fact that we are, as human beings, we are a complicated sort. A few of you are complicated. I mean, some of you are pretty simple, actually, but no, I'm not. You're looking at me like, complicated? Who are you talking about? No, we are a complicated sort, and I think stories have a way of addressing it. An example of that is one, I can't imagine there's not a person here who has not seen this movie, The Wizard of Oz. Okay. Now, what are the kinds of things The Wizard of Oz addresses?
Courage. Courage.
Yes, courage. Heart. Fear. Brain. Home. Are you yearning to be home? Go home. Wickedness. Goodness. Glinda, the good witch. Yeah. If you've seen Wicked, then then it all turns that story up on top of its head. Friendship, partnership, community. Restlessness.
At first she
Yeah. She wants to run away from home. Yeah. So there's just one simple story addresses so many different things that, again, if we give ourselves the time to ponder it, has a way of not only speaking to us, but potentially then drawing out of us something that is potentially supposed to be drawn out of us. You should be glad that I didn't pick It's a Wonderful Life. It just took everything within my power to resist putting that on the list, because we would have taken 6 weeks just to talk about it. But that's an example, personally, for me, that addresses so many things inside of me. And in many ways has evoked many things out of me. It's a very simple story. This is not rocket science, right? But because it addresses, what Jung would say, the archetypal realities within us, it's a story you want to keep going back to. How many? Do you have any movies that you keep going back to? Give me examples.
Big Chill.
The Big Chill, yeah. Christmas Vacation. Yeah, that profound movie. Yes. What are the others that you? Huh? The Quiet Man. Ooh, yeah, good Irish movie. Huh? Groundhog Day. Yeah. Wow. Huh? Dirty Dancing. Ooh. Okay. To Kill a Mockingbird. There you go. The Deer Hunter. Wow, that's Casablanca. Man, we got years of class here that we can. And why do we go back to them? Because there's something there it's speaking to, right? Sometimes we go back to it just because it's familiar. It's a way to get back in touch with our own past. But I think another reason why we go back to these is that they address something in us. And again, hopefully, they are calling something out of us. And of course, the Bible is just chock full of these incredibly deep and profound stories. Not simply the story of Jesus, but from the very beginning, right? The story of the Garden of Eden and all of what takes place there, and the story of Noah and the story of David and his life, the story of Jacob and Esau, the story of Joseph and his brothers. I mean, just story after story after story that, again, as people of faith, if we gave ourselves the chance to sort of continue to plumb the depths of those stories, they would speak to us of, I think, even things of which we may even be aware without having given ourselves the chance to immerse ourselves in those stories. Star Wars. There you go. You like Star Wars there? Yeah, okay. Is sort of that, great, vast, archetypal movie that, deals with so many issues of good and evil and relationships and darkness and light and blah, blah, blah. We could do a whole series on Star Wars, to be sure. So, with that as background, we turn to, and I knew this thing would go off. So, do we know how to operate this thing? I hope this thing works. I wanted to start you off with just the first couple minutes of, I got to turn it off. And then I have to turn it on. If this doesn't work right away, I'm not going to.
Carolyn's coming to the rescue.
Carolyn's coming to the rescue. Excuse me. If it goes right back to the beginning, we're gonna forget it. If it doesn't bring it back up to the, I don't want to go through the rigmarole of the previews. Okay, I have a hunch we're not going to watch the first part, but you've already seen it, so I was wanting to kind of set the table. Oh, there it is, perfect. Oh, play, turn up the volume. You hear back there? If you build it, he will come.
say?
If you build it, he will come.
If you build what? Who will come?
Didn't say.
I hate it when that happens.
Trust me, Karen, it is not funny. The man is sick. Very sick.
Karen, honey, if you're finished, go get your book bag. Go.
Well, I'll take her today. I got some errands to do with you.
All right. Hey, what if the boys call while you're gone?
Take a message. In all those years, did you ever... But it's just I've heard that sometimes farmers out in the field, they hear things, you know, voices.
You're hearing voices?
No, it's just that I heard that some farmers do, and I, of course, don't, so I was wondering if I was doing something wrong or something. Did you ever hear voices up there?
Who's hearing voices? Ray is. Not in the field.
No, I'm not. That darn tractor, I'm just gonna get some 3-in-1 oil and that ought to do it. Nice talking to you.
All right, that's it. Huh? Who are you, huh? What do you want from me?
You're not supposed to like acid flashback or anything, do you?
I never took acid.
Well, then you hallucinate. It's like a flash forward.
Annie, there's more.
Honey, what's it?
I think I know what if you build it, he will come means.
Ooh, why do I not think this is such a good thing?
I think it means that if I build a baseball field out there, that shoeless Joe Jackson will get to come back and play ball again.
You're kidding.
Uh-uh.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
So if you're Annie, how would you feel about that conversation? Same way she did? So Field of Dreams was based upon a book. Most of you know that, Shoeless Joe, written by W.P. Kinsella, who, of course, the name makes its way into the book. What some don't know is that the name Kinsella, W.P. Kinsella, he was attracted. Part of the reason the story came to be was of his attraction with J.D. Salinger, who is the character behind Terrence Mann, the boat rocker. He's based upon J.D. Salinger because J.D. Salinger is actually in the book. But when they went to produce the movie, they were afraid that Salinger would sue the movie company for putting him in the story, and so they decided just to make another character, Terrence Mann, based upon J.D. Salinger. But W.P. Kinsella, who wrote the book, was intrigued by the fact that J.D. Salinger had two characters in two of his books who were named Kinsella, John Kinsella and Ray Kinsella. Ray Kinsella, I think, was in Catcher in the Rye, and John Kinsella was in another short story that J.D. Salinger wrote. And so that's what sort of began sort of generating this story for him, and of course his love of baseball and so on and so forth. So what's the spiritual undertone of A Field of Dreams? What are some of the things that sort of jump out at you that make you think, this is why Steve picked this movie?
Believe. You have to believe.
Believe. You have to believe. You have to believe in what?
Supernatural.
The supernatural.
Yourself.
Yourself.
Dreams and visions.
Dreams and visions. What else?
Divine intervention.
Divine intervention. You could say it's divine in some respects, but this sense of the supernatural, this reality that's a little bit beyond us, right?
Faith.
Faith?
I think the question he says, why me?
Why me?
I think it's like Moses and a lot of people in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
They say, you start hearing these voices or God talking to you,
Right.
and you look around saying, little old me, why me?
Right. Why me? So there's this, it feels very much like the call of Moses or the call of Abraham, where you have this sense that you are being addressed by the beyond, at the very least, if not God himself, if not Jesus himself. This sense of feeling called to do something. And unfortunately, in so many respects, in stories like this, movies like this, it's this audible call, right? When we read the story of Moses, Moses is having a conversation, it just happens to be in his language even, and in this movie it speaks his language, it's English, and we have this very audible conversation with God. How many of you have had those? What is this? Lily Tomlin said that. How is it that when we talk to God, it's said to be prayer, but when God talks to us, we're said to be schizophrenic? So, having this sense of God or the beyond speak to you is a very significant issue for us as human beings, isn't it? This sense that, is God trying to say something to me? And I think we can experience that in all sorts of ways, right? Sometimes it is a very deep sense of God saying something, though we don't hear it audibly. We sense it deep within, that God is saying something to me in a very personal way, and often through the events that are happening around us, right? For Ray Kinsella, it's the voice is not driven by events. Right? It's just a voice. It comes kind of out of nowhere, right? He's just minding his own business, which is very biblical. Moses is just minding his own business, right? Hello. And the voice speaks, Maybe Peter and Andrew were minding their own business at the boats alongside the Sea of Galilee. But Jesus says, come follow me. So there's this voice that comes directly. But I think for many of us, the voice speaks through events. Would that be safe to say that things happen, events conspire, and we feel that we are being addressed in some way? Why am I so lucky? We often say to ourselves, why me? On the positive side, why am I so lucky? Why did I get all this? Why was I so fortunate? Why do I have so much? And we leave ourselves open to being addressed with that question, why? Or, on the other side, why did this terrible thing happen to me? Why am I the subject of this unfortunate event? And what is this saying to me? Now, of course, you can go to Psychology 101 and they'll explain it one way, and there's probably a little truth somewhere in there. There's some psychology behind what's going on. But I think spirit and psychology can oftentimes go together, right? So that, it's not only driven by psychology. It's you would expect to hear me say this as a pastor. I believe it's also the world of the Spirit. And the Spirit speaks to us. I had a friend of mine dear friend of mine, and who was really struggling about whether he was being called to go to a church. And he struggled and struggled and struggled as to whether, and the church was in Hickory, Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania. And a lovely little church there, and he was in Michigan. He was really struggling with whether he would be called. And he was a youth director and youth pastor, and he took his youth group out to a movie. And the movie was Hoosiers, which takes place in where? What town? Hickory. Hickory! So he goes to this movie thinking about this call he's been receiving to go to Hickory, Pennsylvania, and all he hears is Hickory. He says, that's God telling me I'm going. And he goes. Wow. Was he happy? He was happy. I know Hickory. Well, and you had questions as to whether he'd be happy there. Okay. Yeah.
If you're the farmer, where would you expect to hear voices? In a field full of ears.
Oh, boy. Oh, man. We got to recover this real quick. So Ray says, just prior to this clip, as he kind of runs through sort of the early part of his life, and how he came to meet Annie and how he came to buy a farm and so on and so forth, he ends just before this clip starts by saying, until I heard the voice, I never did a crazy thing in my whole life. Until I heard the voice, I never did a crazy thing in my whole life. And boy, that's biblical, isn't it? Because the Bible is filled with a bunch of crazy people, right? Who feel compelled to do something out of the sense of call, the sense of I am being called to do this. The voice is speaking to me, and in hearing the voice, I don't care how crazy it is, I will do it. And to consider that based in the Scripture, or to consider that based in a movie. I love that scene. He trying to explain to his wife that he's supposed to build a baseball field. That Shoeless Joe is going to come back, and her expression on her face is priceless. Like, oh my God, what is this guy talking about? But that's the crazy, right? That's the risk one takes in responding to the radical call of Jesus. And I think one of the things that maybe we struggle with as modern day Christians, 21st century American Christians, is the real, or at least I hope we struggle with, is our fear of being crazy. and the draw to be normal, to normalize ourselves, and in a sense to normalize our faith, to not be crazy. And I think that a story like this again responds to not just to evoking something from us, but then the question around whether or not we have that thing within us that wants the voice. Does that make any sense? Is there something within each of us that craves that voice to speak to us in order to do something of significance? And to ponder and wonder about what is it that that God might be speaking to us around our own sense of call. So, what other spiritual themes or archetypal themes do you see in this story that you think are worth mentioning? Redemption of
Father and Son.
Okay, so redemption, reconciliation between Father and Son, which is, prodigal son, Luke 15. How do we bring, the Father and the Son together? In this sense, it's, the Son has rejected the Father and has never took the chance to say what needed to be said before the Father dies. And this age-old struggle between who am I versus who my Father is, and what do I do with that? How do I be myself and yet at the same time be in relationship with my Father? And I will apologize up front. These first two movies are sort of male movies, so I get it. The last two movies are driven from female protagonists, so ladies, just hold on. We'll get to those. But as I put these lists together, I thought, oh, geez, how did I... anyway. And the middle two movies are kind of... they're multi-gender, as it were. So or bigender. Anyway, so this issue of Father and Son, and how does reconciliation take place? How does redemption take place? I also think about the redemption of the Black Sox, right? The baseball team that kind of goes sent off in disgrace, and are they given the chance to be redeemed? Are they given the chance to play baseball again? And so they're brought back to Ray's field in order to experience the joy that they had given up, right? And life is that interesting balance, right, between being given something so precious and then squandering it, right? The Black Sox the White Sox are given something so precious, and they squander it, and they lose that opportunity, and in a very fantastical way are given the opportunity to reclaim it, which is again another redemption story. And the truth of the matter is, redemption is obviously at the heart of the gospel. And again, is it a message that speaks to us, to something within us, our own need for redemption, our own maybe having lost what was so precious, and at the same time evoking out of us a redemption for others, right? That there are lots of folks who have squandered what was given and would perhaps merit our judgment. And yet, redemption is called for at the heart of our Christian walk, to give yet another chance to those who can sometimes so eagerly lose sight of what has been given them. What else strikes you in this movie?
I think closure did. In two incidents, Terrence Mann
Yes.
gave up his life, and then with all this that happened, he had a closure to his life.
A little closure to his life, right?
And the same with Greg.
Right.
He had a closure. He regretted what he did so long. It was eating away with him at his father.
Right.
And then he had that closure.
Had that closure, right?
Had a closure to it.
Yes, it's a great way of saying it, right? And the interesting thing about that Terrence Mann character, he's got so much of a shell, right? He can't let anything penetrate, while he is so masterfully kind of evoked out of so many people a calling. He at the same time has shut himself down and has kind of erected this shell around him. And his journey in part is coming to terms with himself, right? And at the end, he finally admits to the fact that he actually did give that interview. He did really want to go to Evans Field, and that really was a part of him. And again, we're looking at this book and curriculum and wondering about exploring it in our adult education called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, written by a friend of mine, Pete Scazzaro, where he talks about that the emotional, psychological world has to be put into tandem with the spiritual world, that you can't become spiritually healthy unless you're emotionally healthy. And you can't come to really a term of what the meaning of your life is until you begin to explore the broken parts of who you are. And that a true spiritual journey is becoming more and more honest with oneself. Terrence Mann is on a journey to become more and more honest with himself. And it's finally when he becomes honest with himself that he's able to not just have closure, but gets to go into the cornfield. Not that I want to go real fast, but yeah.
I forgot the name of the character, but Burt Lancaster.
Yes, Moonlight Graham. Mm-hmm.
So he's a role player, and then he, gets out of the whole business and becomes a doctor. And when they were dressing him as a doctor, they were like, "Oh, it's so sad you are a role player." And he's like, "This is my life. This is what I was meant."
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, of course, not of course. Many of you may not know that Moonlight Graham is actually a historical figure. He was actually a baseball player, and actually played one inning in one baseball game for the New York Giants, and never got to bat. I won't go into how he got into the story, But I love that, again, this other narrative that's happening, which is, Moonlight Graham gets that close to his dream. So there's this reality of unrealized dream, right? You get that close. As Ray Kinsella says, you get that close. It would kill some men to get that close and not, get the opportunity to really realize that dream. Well, life is filled with what? Unrealized dreams, right? I mean, we all have our little bucket list, right? To things, or maybe we go back to when we were kids and we say, "Oh, I really wanted to be X," or "I really wanted to be Y," and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, one of the things that Hollywood will sometimes do is it just pumps us full of these stories of people realizing their dreams. And you come out and say, "Man, where was I? What a loser I am." But the truth of the matter is, life is filled with sometimes realized dreams, but oftentimes unrealized dreams. We don't always get what we want, said Mick Jagger a long time ago. So you can't always have what you want. So Moonlight Graham doesn't realize that dream, but life is also a journey of coming to terms with really what may have really been the real purpose of your life, right? This is why I love It's a Wonderful Life, right? George Bailey never realizes his dream, right? He never gets there. But what's happening in the midst of it is there is another narrative that is going on in his life that he can't even quite see, and he realizes ultimately that that's the purpose for why he's here. Well, Moonlight Graham, becomes a doctor, and he really did become a doctor, and he really did kind of do the things that the movie talks about. And he has that great line. What's that great line? If when he talk when Kinsella says, it would kill some men to, and he says, well, that it would have been a greater tragedy had I not been a doctor. I'm sorry?
The real tragedy would have been if I had only been a doctor for 5 minutes.
Right. Great. Yeah, thank you for remembering that. Yeah, the real tragedy would have if I had only been a doctor for 5 minutes. And then, how that all comes into fruition at the end where he steps off the field and, takes care of that little girl, realizing that this is really the sum and substance of what my life was really supposed to be about. That's a spiritual journey for us all, right? Coming to terms with what God has chosen to do with us, or what we have chosen to do with ourselves. And, it's an imperfect world, and some of us come more to terms with that than others, right? And some live their whole lives with some sense of an unrealized dream that, for some reason I didn't do what I feel like I was being called to do, but I think at the end of the day, it is coming to terms with what our limitations are, along with what we've been able to achieve or accomplish with what our gifts have been. So yeah, thanks for raising that. Others?
Ray's call that he answers the call of courage and moves forward in the face of ridicule and anger and
the craziness.
In every movement, you've got a situation where first it's ridiculed and then it generates anger and finally it's accepted as truth. And this filled out that curve beautifully.
Yeah. And all the different factors that go into that courage, right? He not only faces into just doing something nutty in the face of his neighbors and friends and so on and so forth, and his family, but then there's financial risk that he takes, and really drives himself almost to bankruptcy by doing this. And those are real terms when it comes to how we respond to that sense of call. So, yeah.
I was impressed with the brother-in-law who was a non-believer, and at the end the veil was lifted from his eyes.
Yes.
And that he saw, he
believed. It's interesting to watch this movie in the week of Epiphany, right? Epiphany, where we, that sense of coming, revelation, that something's revealed to us. This is a very, what we would call, Platonic movie. The notion that there is a more real world that is not visible. So when that guy marches across the field, almost gets beamed by the guy pitching, he can't quite see what is so clearly real to Ray and his family. He can't see it, and for him, it's all make believe. It's all fantasy. It's all delusion. It's all nuts. And in a very real sense, when we think about ourselves as Christians, the degree to which we believe in the reality, the concrete reality of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus speaks about the kingdom of heaven over and over and over again. He says the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is here, is real, and yet we can't see it. Right? But it is this leap of faith that we take to believe that it is even more real than what we see. More real than what we see. And that's the very inspiration that inspires us to move forward in faith with the things that we believe Jesus has called us to be. It's because we believe that world is more real than this one. I used to have a guy come out of church every Sunday in my first church. God bless him. He used to say, I'd preach, just an excellent sermon. I'd preach a sermon, and he'd come out and say, he'd say this about once a month, it's just, you understand why sometimes people leave the ministry. Anyway, he would say about once a month, that's all fine and good, Reverend, but I live in the real world. Oh, okay, yeah. I've been talking about fantasy here, right? But that's the crux, right? This is the crux of our discipleship, really, is the degree to which we acknowledge that which is, though invisible to these eyes, is more real to the eyes of the heart. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit over our time, but I'll just finish up a couple of things to mention. There is this sense of timelessness, the timelessness of baseball, right? I'm looking at Paul Getz over there. He knows what the timelessness of baseball is. How many baseballs you got there?
600.
How many? 600 baseballs he's got, all autographed by some of the guys I think probably in this movie. You should, or exactly. But this sense of the timelessness of baseball, that the world will change, and history is written and rewritten, but it's baseball. That great speech by Terrence Mann, by James Earl Jones about the timelessness of baseball. Well, there is that reality that we live with in our own Christian faith and our own Christian journey as to what are those things which are timeless, right? What are the eternal truths? What's the timelessness of our faith? And frankly, the church is always in a conversation about that. The things that change within the life of the church always provokes a debate about what's timeless, right? And one of the reasons why we keep plopping, I say that this week, but I'm changing the affirmation of faith this Sunday. We repeat almost every Sunday the affirmation of faith, which is the Apostles' Creed, right? And we say it over and over again, and people say, "Oh, stop," But there's a sense of timelessness to it, right? We say this. We say this along with the generations before us, the centuries before us. We say the same thing, and because we believe that these are timeless truths that we wish to carry forward into the future. So there's this timelessness of baseball and the things that don't change, which would be a good commentary on the designated hitter rule, which I think is just an abomination. But I won't go any further than that. Yeah.
I think one of the first questions that comes out of the movie is heaven a cornfield in Iowa?
Is what?
Is heaven?
Is heaven a cornfield? And I think it's a good question. Sure. And what's the answer?
Well, we're from Iowa, and I can say right now, no one in Iowa feels like they're in heaven at this time.
That's the truth. Yeah, it's all shot in the summer, right? There was one snow scene, but yeah. So yeah, is this heaven? No, it's Iowa, which is a great line. And then there's this last line, and I won't keep it any much longer, where Moonlight Graham says, "We just don't recognize life's most significant moments while they're happening." We just don't recognize life's most significant moments while they're happening. And how true that is. We don't know what is really taking place right in front of our eyes. And so, in many respects, the spiritual life is a journey of epiphany, and sometimes the epiphany takes place when we recognize what's happened. That I never knew that I was taking a turn there. I never knew that person was what that person was for me, or I never knew that failure was going to lead to this, or that success was going to lead to this. We never know what significance, and maybe there's good reason for that, right? There's good reason to not know how significant these things are. In some respects, it invites us into a deeper humility in our own spiritual journey when we are sometimes veiled from those things, and in order to understand later what they are to mean. But I think if there's anything that the Field of Dreams, and I can make a couple more comments on this next time. But I think this, the thing about the Field of Dreams is it invites us into this time, or into perhaps more frequent time of contemplation over the voice and the events and the revelation that is taking place in our lives daily. One of the things I think that we suffer from, I was just listening to a podcast this afternoon, we suffer from distraction, right? And we are perhaps the most distracted generation of human civilization, of human history, because we just have so much that can distract us, and so much that can prevent us from the contemplative life that would make us wonder about, what are these things to mean? What is the voice really saying to me? Part of the reason why we don't do the crazy thing is we don't hear the voice to begin with. Or we hear it, but we only hear it once. We don't hear it the next day or the next month or the next year. We just, we move on and we're further distracted. So it would be interesting for us to think about that in terms of our own journey. How much time do we spend in the cornfield, right? And to hear that voice, and to begin to take it seriously, and to muster the courage to do the crazy thing, whatever the crazy thing is that you feel that God is calling you to do.
Isn't the Bible a field of dreams?
I'm sorry?
Isn't the Bible a field of dreams?
Oh, by all means. There's just story after story, right? Voices. And so, next week we're going to talk about A River Runs Through It. How many of you have read that? Have you seen that movie? Okay. Most of you have. Great. Again, we have a copy or two of it available in the front office. Thank you, Sharon, for that. We're grateful. And so we'll take that story up. I won't spend so much time on the preamble. We'll get further into the story. But hey, it's going to be a good movie when it's about a Presbyterian minister, right? Anyway, so let's pray and we'll move forward into the evening. Thank you, O God, for this chance to wonder about your movement in our lives through a wonderful medium of art. We pray, Lord, that you will open our lives and give us those moments of contemplation such that we might hear the voice that is speaking and we might have the courage to respond, to be about the craziness of realizing the kingdom of heaven in this world. We are thankful for those who are so creative to tell these stories, and pray that they may ultimately evoke something from us such that we will be more faithful to your call in our lives. For we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Stay warm.